Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in to Machine Learning track on the 4Developers conference. I'm Paweł Łukaszuk and I'm here today to share some of my thoughts about algorithm. Let's start from beginning. Algorithm is described as finite sequence of well-defined activities necessary to complete a specific task. The goal of algorithm is to simplify and systematize reality. On paper, algorithms sound like pinnacle of efficiency, but sometimes we do misplace our trust in them. We expect them to be almost godlike, to be so perfect that we can follow them wherever they lead us. We tend to forget that their creators were limited by restrictions like time, money, computing power, or simply limited by available knowledge. In this session, I will show you a few interesting examples when algorithms caused some unexpected results. Let's switch to cosmos for a while. In early 1970s, scientists intensified their studies into the possible cause and effects of global warming. 4 years later, two of them wrote a paper of a new concern that substances called CFC could potentially reduce level ozone in the stratosphere. In 1975, US Congress asked NASA to develop a program of research and technology to monitor upper atmosphere. In particular, intent was to know what was happening with ozone layer. As a result, in 1978, Nimbus 7 satellite was put into orbit. This satellite called two sensors designed to measure a total amount of ozone over entire globe. Anyway, the hole in the ozone layer over Antarctica remained undetected for next 7 years. Ironically, the hole was not discovered by NASA, but British scientists using some obsolete equipment. And it wasn't until 1985. The British scientists found that the amount of ozone layer over Halley Bay was about 40% less than it has been the previous year. When the NASA reviewed its data, it confirmed that there was a really big hole in ozone layer. So what was wrong? Unfortunately, the data analysis software called Total Ozone Mapping Spectrometer has been programmed to flag and set aside data points that deviated greatly from expected measurements. It was done because scientists were expecting ozone depletion to occur first at highest level in the atmosphere. So, in short, the team failed to detect the ozone depletion years earlier simply because it was much more severe than they expected. In next example, we move from space to USA, and let's talk about education. In 1983, publisher US News and World Report was on the verge of bankruptcy, and it was looking for an idea to increase their sales. Unfortunately, they found one. The idea was to create ranking of all universities in country. You might not know this, but in US, higher education is a way more serious choice than in Poland. Taking into account cost of studies, the choice of university is one of the most important in life. It determines your career, social circle, or even your future partner. You may notice that a lot of most influential people in the US graduated from the same university or graduated one of the 4 more influential universities. Such a report is a real challenge because, first of all, there are almost 2,000 universities in the USA, and secondly, what to consider creating such a report. The magazine approached the topic ingeniously. The result was based on surveys sent to universities. There were no scientific research, there were no algorithm, there was simply a survey sent to the head of universities. Well, because why not? The ranking gained popularity, but many rectors raised objections, so changes has to be made. And again, there was a problem. How to evaluate quality of education? What influence does the university have on one student, or how to measure the impact on a total 10 million students? And once again, the journalists had a great idea that we need an algorithm. So they found some factors which were important in education and can be measured, and then determined the importance of those factors. As most of data was not available, indirect factors were used. Like, for example, SAT scores. SAT is US equivalent of Matura exam. Percentage of students who have completed first year. Admission rates. Ratio of number of scientific staff to number of students. Percentage of graduates who have supported the universities financially. This is quite interesting because in Poland, in Europe, it is uncommon to pay to your university after you finish it, but in USA it's something quite happening quite often. Another factor was evaluation of academic staff from outside of university, and 24% of score was based on a subjective evaluation of the researcher society. Because the best universities have a good reputation. Then the ranking became a national standard. Well, results were not controversial. The criteria reflect the quality of education to some extent. So everything seems to be okay. As a result, low-rated universities were losing good employees and candidates. So they started to thinking how to improve their score. Of course, there were some unforeseen consequences. Like, for instance, growing investment in educational infrastructure, which obviously is good, but there were more negative ones. For example, the cost of learning was not taken into account. So universities started to raise their fees to have more money to investment. And that is one of the reasons why between 1985 and 2013, the cost of education increased by 500%. It is roughly 4 times more than inflation rate. Another example of those consequences were that some universities immediately rejected the best candidates. It might sound weird because why university should reject the best candidate? Well, according to algorithm, according to this ranking, for university was better to reject a candidate than to let him withdraw the application because he got a better alternative. And there are also one more quite weird consequence. Sport programs become extremely important because it was considered as the cheapest and easiest way of promotion of university. And some universities got quite creative ideas how to improve their score using, let me say that, non-standard approach. For instance, a university in Baylor covered the next take of a SAT test for their students, so they have one more chance to get better grades. Bucknell University sent to creator of ranking false SAT results because there were no chance to check if those data was real. And college in Iona forged all data sent to publishers. And they did this quite well because Iona College in 1 year jumped from 50 to 13 position in this region. So being not honest sometimes gave you good results in the short term. The side effect was also a huge business for consultants. For the purpose of the ranking, the university started to manage students as a portfolio of investments. This one is good for sport, this one is good for science, this one is from wealthy families, so he will support us. It is important for university how well the student will influence university ranking. On the other hand, there was an also offer for candidates, like for instance, 4-day camp for $16,000 that prepares you for interviews and teaches you how to prepare your education reports, or a service that assesses you whenever a student will get to a chosen university and suggest how to improve their performance. It's I would describe this like a Pimp My CV college edition. The worst part of this all is that this have no education value. It's just to sort and rank candidates so they can improve the results of an algorithm and university got better place in ranking. Recently, we learned some confidential fact about this ranking, and it turned out it was designed so that Harvard, Stanford, Yale, and Princeton were on the top, because those universities were known to being the best of the best, and while they were on the top of the ranking, this added credibility to whole ranking. And also universities with traditions, they were well known in society. That is why this costs were not taken into account, because those 4 universities are also the most expensive ones. And this is the reason why 25% of score depended on the recognition of university. Peter Sack, the expert of education system in USA, summarized whole situation that instead of measuring what universities do for students in educational mean, current ranking says that institution is good because it has admitted rich student with high scores and turned away less wealthy with modest scores. It is worth to mention that we have similar ranking in Poland called Ranking Perspektywy. It's published for more than 15 years, I think, but it's not so important. I think mainly because higher education have way smaller influence on our life here in this country. And while we talk about education, I want to point out some interesting things that are happening right now. This photo is from last month. In the UK, students couldn't sit for the test because of pandemic, and the grades from this test would be used to determine their chances to getting into university. So education department decided to use an algorithm to issue those grades based on previous performance. After multiple protests, students forced the department to reverse its decision and allow them to take the test more traditional way. And a similar situation takes place in international baccalaureate program. You may know it's more like international Matura exam. This is also a situation where your chances to get an university are based on an algorithm that investigates your previous performance. This is enough for education for today. And then now let's take a look on finance market. You probably know that stock market becomes so complex, so nobody really understands it. But did you know that roughly 70% of trade in stock in USA is made by algorithms? This is called high frequency trading. It works so well that in 2010, one company spent more than $300 million to lay 800 miles long cable just to reduce latency by milliseconds. And construction has to be kept in secret to avoid competition. And I must admit that making transactions using algorithm usually make a really good money. There are big competition in this market, in this business, but sometimes bad things happen. 6th of May 2010. It was called the flash crash or crash at 2:45. It was second largest difference between intraday high and low up to that point. Stock market lost 9% of volume in just 5 minutes. A first explanation of this crash was unsupervised behavior of algorithm that was trapped in a loop. Everyone was pretty sure that it was not caused by direct actions of men, because it all happened in just a few minutes. And it took, while it happened in 2010, it took 5 more years to investigate what really happened. And it turned out that really was an accident. No one really wanted to destroy the US stock market. One British trader bought commercial software, then modified it slightly, and later used it to earn some money. He didn't want it to make any harm. He just wants to earn some money and don't work too much for it. So he ran the software and placed thousands of orders that were modified about 20,000 times. He didn't understand, he didn't foresee that his action unfortunately affected other algorithms, and that caused order imbalance, and in effect it crashed whole market. So whole market collapsed by 9%. And if you think about it, if one guy working from other country, from his parent house and suburban West London, if one guy can cause such damage, then we are in real deep trouble. But let's switch to something less expensive, but maybe more influential for one person. 2019, Massachusetts. One man received a letter from the Registry of Motor Vehicles, and this letter informed that his driver license has been revoked. The only problem was that he had not received so much as traffic violation in years, so there was no legitimate reason why he should give up his driving license. After several phone calls, he learned the reason. It turned out that his image, his face, has been automatically flagged by a facial recognition algorithm. The algorithm has determined that he looked sufficiently like another Massachusetts driver. And the automated letter was sent as end result. After a few frantic calls and argues, the Registry of Motor Vehicles claimed that the advantages of protecting the public is more important than inconvenience of the wrongly targeted few. And I think that losing driver's license in country like US, when a lot of people have to commute to work for 50 or 60 miles, it's a lot more than just an inconvenience. And also Registry of Motor Vehicles claimed that it was the wrongly accused individual problem to clear his name if in event of any mistakes. Simply, you as a person, as a human, you have a problem, and we as a department won't care about it. Actually, equally alarming is the possibility that same algorithm of facial recognition may falsely profile an individual as a terrorist. And it happens quite frequently, because from record on the last 7 years, on the world, it happens roughly 1,500 times each week. And the most ridiculous results of data matching errors include 3 US Army majors, a 4-year-old boy. I have no idea how to mistake 4-year-old boy with a terrorist, but maybe there are terrorists who are so young. And the last interesting case was an American Airlines pilot who was detained 80 times over the course of a single year. One of the reasons it is because it's well-known fact that computer vision software performs slightly worse on people of color. And if you dig a bit deeper to this case, you might know that the most studied image data in the world, it's called ImageNet, contains 70% of its images come from 5 countries. It is USA, UK, Spain, Italy, and Australia. So if your background is from another country, if your background is from another ethnicity, the algorithm will work way worse on you. And now let's move to the next algorithms that may be more familiar to you. Let's talk about internet. You must have heard such a phrase, the phrase, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. For many years, it was a symbol of one of the pillars of internet. It is ultimate privacy. No matter who you are, no matter where you are from, how you look, your peers only know what you wrote. And it was true in 1993 when this image was made, but it's not true today in 2020. On average, internet user generates 6 GB of data every day. And we get the 6 GB if we don't take into account video materials, because when we count high definition videos, this number rises to 145 gigabytes. This data is gathered, then processed, and based on this data, users are assigned to groups and given properties. For instance, Facebook have at least 98 advertisement groups and 52,000 properties. And those groups are really interesting. Like, for instance, there's a group for users who have an anniversary within 30 days, users who own motorcycles, users who commute to work, or users who play canvas games. And what can we do with such knowledge? With such knowledge, we can send perfectly tailored ads. For example, if the algorithm has determined that I was born and raised in one city, but now I live in different one, and soon my mother is celebrating her birthday. On this day, I already have plans, and I have active credit card, then I can get an ad of a local florist, which also offers delivery service. You will admit that in this situation, it is worth considering such an offer. Of course, those assumptions are often wrong, but on such a large scale, it is still acceptable. The results are much better comparing to sending ads blindly using TV or radio broadcasters. And all those data I have mentioned earlier are available for Facebook or for other such like portals. In addition to advertising, Facebook can also influence the message we see in our news. You have probably noticed that sometimes you missed posts from some sites you have liked. And this is not an illusion. The posts we see are selected so that we like them. It doesn't matter if you're red or blue, the algorithm always will find something interesting from you. And the point is to keep an user online as long as possible. Because Facebook, Twitter, Google, and other such services were not created to promote truth, to spread the principles of democracy, or for other higher goals. They are supposed to make money. And they do it quite well. For instance, Facebook, in the second quarter of 2016, earned 6.4 billion just from advertising. That is why we are surrounded by a colorful bubble. The information we get on our newsfeed should not make us think. They should not change our beliefs. They are supposed to spark only positive emotions. The main danger is a so-called cognitive bubble that reinforces our personal beliefs and the perception of the surrounding world. And another dangerous element, of course, is circulation of fake news, which is quite important in last years. But such manipulation can also have much more negative effects. In 2012, Cornell University, with Facebook permission, conducted an experiment. The goal was simple: to manipulate user emotions by tailoring their newsfeed. During the study, posts and news were simply filtered so that the subject could see more positive or more negative information, and no fakes were prepared. The conclusions were really interesting because it turned out that emotional states can be transferred to others people, leading people to experience the same emotion without their awareness. For me, this really sounds scary. And the more scary is the fact that research was conducted without consent of its subject. So we are not sure if people who took part on this experiment were adults. We don't know if they were a child. We don't know if they weren't if they haven't any mental illnesses. We don't know if anyone has suffered from such a transfer of emotion. It is good to hear that after a wave of criticism, Facebook has banned such practice in its regulations. And now that we know that we can change our moods, it is also clear that we can study it. There is even a field of psychology that work on a theory of psychological tests. It's called psychometrics. And in 2012, Facebook patented an algorithm to automatically create a psychologist portrait based on your Facebook activity. The starting point was the Facebook application with simple test. The result were confronted with the likes on the Facebook. And finally was created a personal model based so-called Big Five personality traits. And in response, a Polish researcher, Michał Kosiński, published research showing how accurate such algorithm can be. According to Michał Kosiński's research, with 10 likes, we know as much as your coworkers, with 70 as much as your friend, with 150 as much as your parents, and with 300 likes, we know as much as your partner. Further conclusions were also interesting because on the basis of 68 likes, we can determine your sexual preference. For men with 88% effectiveness, we can determine your ethnicity and skin color. For citizen of USA with 95% effectiveness, we can determine religion. We can determine your satisfaction with life. We can determine substance use, like for instance, alcohol, tobacco, or drugs. We can determine your age and political views. But political views work only in America because in America there are only two major political parties. And I have to mention that today there is some controversy about the effectiveness of this method. Some researchers say that it was not so effective, that this level is about at less than 70%. But still, such knowledge gives great opportunities and should not fall into wrong hands. And unfortunately, this is what happened in 2013. That was when Alexander Kogon from Cambridge University created an application called This Is Your Digital Life. And later he sold this application to Cambridge Analytica, which logo we see on the screen. Almost 300,000 users participated as volunteers for the study. because it was advertised as a scientific project. In addition to the result from this app, application was collecting data from user profiles because they agreed to it. The problem was that Facebook mechanism at that point were a bit flawed and allowed to download profile information also from participant contracts who have no idea about those app and about this research. Based on this information, company has created millions of psychological profiles and then used them to influence spending elections. And the algorithm were supposed to match the message in such a way to have the greatest possible impact on target. We are sure that the mechanism was used in the Ted Cruz and Donald Trump presidential campaign. It was the same presidential campaign in 2016, which is a bit funny. It was used during the Brexit vote and Mexico and parliamentary election in Mexico. And after revealing this information, public opinion started to discuss ethical standard for social media companies and advisory organization for politicians. A lot of people demanded greater consumer protection in the online media, the right to privacy and reduction propaganda and disinformation and all those fake news situation. And this also leads to Mr. Zuckerberg, who was forced to testify before the Senate of Committee. You have probably remembered this situation, those photos when he was sitting and sweating, trying to explain people how the Facebook work. Later, we learned that foreign countries also tried to manipulate voters. So today it's hard to tell how big this influence was. We also don't know how many profiles were downloaded because the number are not clear. Cambridge Analytica stated that it was 30 millions of profiles. Facebook briefly stated that it was 50 millions, but later in the official document estimated it at about 87 million of million profile of people. Probably the most of you don't have access to so large data sets, but it's not a real problem because you can always buy it. And there are at least 8 data collection and analysis corporation operating in US. We call such companies data brokers. They are not regulated by law. They don't have to inform what data they process. Even sensitive data can be sold, sensitive data like medical or criminal records. And those data comes from multiple sources like internet service providers, credit card operators, mobile phone operators, grocery stores, which is quite surprising. And of course, obviously, this data comes from mobile apps and websites. On the screen, you see the 8 more important companies. And, those information can be shared with anyone who pays for it. For example, your employer can buy such a data. And the worst part is that those information don't have to be 100% correct. So if you have a similar name to a serial killer, then you have a big problem. It might be really hard for you to get a job in US. In only 2012, the data broker industry generated 156 billion in revenues. To add you some context, this is twice more than the entire intelligence budget of United States Department of Defense. So CIA, NSA, and all this triple letter name agency. And I have found one slightly similar company here in Poland. It is called Selective. You may know it from a few quite popular infographics posted years ago, especially the right one from the Open Air Festival. The main difference is that from the mentioned earlier companies, this one collects only anonymous data, collects it from mobile phones, and based on this data, create user profiles. On average, profile contained about 360 traits, but no sensitive data is revealed and processed. So there are no your name, there are no your birth date. It is based on this profile. There should be impossible to recognize you as a person. So far, I have told stories about algorithms made for commercial or research purpose, but there are also algorithms made by government. And the most interesting ones, surprisingly, were made with one goal in mind: to build a harmonious society, and to be more precisely, to build a harmonious socialist society. A social credit system, the national reputation system being developed by the Chinese government, is the name of all this group of algorithms. After this is Beijing claimed that the system is created out of necessity because countries undergoing rapid urbanization, a lot of citizens have no credit history, they have no use of banks. There is also a problem of trust among people, with trust between people and institutions. For Chinese media, describe this idea as punishing individuals and bringing harmony to collective. And to achieve this, mechanism must be made to encourage confidence and to punish breaches of confidence in society. But as you know, creating algorithm is hard. So there were no surprise that the first launch was total failure, and it was so bad that even Chinese state media criticized it. And believe me, there was a lot of problems to solve. How to describe trust in person? It should be a single number, multiple traits, maybe description. How to handle conflict of interest? Because those who run this system are also affected by its actions. How to deal with bribery? Because there was also an idea that donating money could improve your score. And the most important question, what should be used? Set of predefined rules, or some kind of artificial intelligence or machine learning solution? There were also a lot of technical issues, like how to build so big distributed systems, what kind of personal information should be stored, what about data leaks, and how to simply test it. So taking into account all those problems, the government made a decision. Let's build many solutions to check which approach is better, and test them on part of society. In total, a few million people. In China, it's just a minor part of population, and they do it just because they could. At least 8 independent systems were created and tested in more than 30 cities. The best known two are Swinning and Rongcheng. Authors didn't bother to make cool commercial names, so those names come from the cities when they are implemented. And you might wonder how all those systems work. I do not dwell into internals because it would be a subject for whole talk or maybe even for whole conference. But I know the results, and they are pretty disturbing, because in 2018 were introduced restrictions to people who misbehave, who were flagged by those algorithms. And 11 million people cannot fly planes because they misbehave. 4 million people cannot buy a ticket for high-speed train. And for those kind of people, wait also a lot of other inconvenience, like for instance, they can't get credit in bank, they cannot work in administration, they cannot order a table in the restaurants, or they even cannot use Chinese counterpart of Uber or Tinder app. So if trust is broken in one place, restrictions are imposed everywhere. This is quote from official document from that describe planning outline of this system. This document was adopted by government of China in 2014. This was the last story about what I wanted to share with you. All the topics I have raised are not problems from some different future on the imaginary issues that have little impact on people's lives. This is what's happening here and now. So the question is, who watches algorithm? And the most important legislative document I have found is Council of Europe Convention 108. But this is just data protection benchmark that all countries should aim in other national legislation. Of course, with also GDPR regulation, but it cannot be applied in the most cases because there are no personal data being processed, because most algorithm works on anonymized profiles. Simply, the law doesn't protect us from algorithms, but we are lucky one to have here in Poland few NGOs that can help us. The most influential is Panopticon Foundation. Its mission is described as protect fundamental rights and freedom in the context of growing surveillance and fast-changing technologies. And I must admit that they achieved several successes. So if you are interested in this case, please visit their website. And as we are approaching to the end of this talk, I must admit that I have mentioned many algorithms that were far from perfect. Sometimes they even contain the biases of people who create them, and those biases and imperfection affected human lives in every case. But don't get me wrong, I don't think that we should stop using algorithms just because they make errors. You may know that we humans are quite bad at a lot of things. We are bad at being consistent, bad at being not biased. We get tired, sloppy. Algorithms possess none of those flaws. They're incredibly consistent, they never get tired, and they're absolutely precise. They're also incredibly effective. I think that made life of all of us a lot easier. The problem is that the algorithm don't understand the context on nuance, don't understand emotion, empathy in the way that humans do. I think that the right attitude is somewhere in between, to successfully combine human nature and data, and not to lean too heavily on either side. Before I finish, I want to give a few ideas how to achieve this result, what we should do. If you're just a user, try not to follow blindly advice of an algorithm. Spend some time reviewing results, reviewing inputs, or even running the data past a number of people to eliminate error on either side. If you're making algorithm, remember that solution is in design. You should not create a black box in which we simply fed data and comes out an answer. I think you should build a transparent process designed not just to produce a result, but also to explain how it came up with that result. The perfect system should be interactive, so people can examine how changing data and assumption would change outcomes. And even better idea is to make it open source, like for instance, cryptographic solutions, which are reviewed by many researchers before they became a national industrial standard. And the most important advice for me is accept that your creation won't be perfect. Be prepared and open to fixing in mistakes, because those mistakes can really affect human lives, maybe even your life if you will be unlucky. I know that it's all simply too inconvenient or too difficult maybe to go beyond, but I think it's worth to try. And this is something I would like you all to have in mind. If you have, this is the end of my story. If you have any question or ideas, you can catch me now on Hopin or later on my social media. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this presentation. Thanks for watching. And now we are going back to studio for Q&A session.